This is in Mayorkas's own words at a hearing the other day, that FEMA doesn't have enough money to make it through the remainder of the hurricane season.
The reason FEMA does not have money to take care of this in Asheville is because it spent literally all of it on a program that is not related to disaster relief. Undocumented immigrants are only a federal emergency if your desire is to close our border and stop it. The people who are dead in Asheville right now are victims of that crime.
All right. Hey, how are you doing this morning, my friend?
Morning, Sean. Today, we're here to talk about immigration. We've got a wonderful episode lined up. There are facts and figures once you dive a little bit into this immigration issue that I think would shock every single American. We're going to talk a little bit about what's happening in Asheville, North Carolina right now and why FEMA doesn't have enough money. We're going to talk about why our border is a sieve and exactly the reasons for it. We're going to go through some of the information that was, or misinformation that was involved in the debates that we saw, the vice presidential debates regarding what is happening at our border. And I think for the first time, many Americans after watching this will be able to have a firm understanding as to exactly why the immigration problem in the United States is unsustainable for our country. Every single time our border is breached, there's a safety issue, but there's also a future cost on the American people. We're going to get down to the bottom of what that cost is and exactly what needs to happen in order to solve it.
I think one of the most important things that those of you who are tuning in to this program can understand is that this is not about the right's or the left's arguments. This is about the facts. And that's what Ron and I committed to, not only each other, but to our subscribers, our followers, our listeners, that we're not here to provide you with just hit pieces or opinions. We'll give you our opinions from time to time when something warrants it, but this is about bringing truth. This is about bringing facts on things that matter to all of us. We're what now, 33 days from the election?
Isn't that crazy?
It's mind-boggling to me. I think we are 33 days from the election.
I think a lack of a Democrat primary is what's really throwing me off here. Like, if we'd had that going on, I would feel ready for this whole thing. But we had a candidate thrown at us at the last minute.
Well, I was going to say, we did have a Democrat primary where the nominee, or what was supposed to be the nominee, gathered 14 million American votes. And then we had somebody anointed.
Yeah, no, that's true.
And that's not an opinion. That's a fact. So, see, we're spewing facts. All right, man.
Facts.
Let's jump in. And can I throw the first thing out that I wanted to talk about? Because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about this. And it's the CBP One. And many Americans that tuned into the debate the other night probably said, what the heck is CBP One? And why are they making such a big deal out of it? Well, CBP One, just for reference, is an app that was created that allows immigrants that want to come to the United States to go online, fill out this form, and basically, with the wave of a pen, if you will, they can be granted temporary legal status in this country while they're awaiting their hearing. Mm-hmm. And this CBP One has not been a law that has been on the books since 1990. This is something that was devised under the Biden-Harris administration in 2023, and it went into effect, if my research is correct, August of 2024, or shortly before or after that. So that's the CBP One that you heard when there was a fact check the other night by the moderator. And JD Vance said, well, hold on a minute. If we're going to fact check, we need to talk about the facts and we need to talk about the law. And that's what he did, right? He talked about the law, and then Tim Walz said, well, this has been on the books since 1990. And that's when everybody got muted.
Yeah, that was just the wrong way to put it. I was hoping that it was like Pokemon Go for immigrants. Like, this app tells you go to this certain location and then you can figure out, what's going on. But no, I mean, I thought it'd be valuable if they had a way to guide themselves to a place where they could properly seek asylum and have legal access. I'm not making light when I say it should be like Pokemon Go, but like we have GPSs on phones. This works. It's a communication device. Let's do it. But that's not
what it is.
That's not what it is. Yeah.
Basically, this is a mobile app that was launched by the U.S. Customs Border Protection. It initially came out in 2020, and it was designed for simple travel-related services like scheduling cargo inspections.
Yep.
So I don't want people to look at this and go, Sean, you're wrong. This process has been around since 2020. It was around for its initial design, which was simple travel-related services like scheduling cargo inspections. And it has since evolved into a tool for migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border. And today, asylum seekers must use the app to schedule appointments at U.S. ports of entry and submit their biometric data for processing. So, again, this app did not go into effect until 2024 and really Q4 of 2024. So, again, our job on the wall is to dispel myths and to speak in factual terms. And I think when you hear what this episode brings as far as actual statistics, and these are statistics from independent government sources. These are not from right-leaning, left-leaning sources. This is government data that is supposed to be independent. And that's really what we are. We're fact finders.
Let's jump into Asheville. I want to take a second to talk about this because it's breaking news. By the time this comes out, it will probably have been going on for a week. I'm sure, unfortunately, the death toll is going to rise significantly, and I think it's tragic. Listen, I was up till about 1 o'clock in the morning reviewing this information because of what I continued to keep finding. First, we're not seeing reports of this. You have to look deeper into it, but I can assure you that this is 100% true. So, facts. We've got 30 plus inches of rain fall in western North Carolina, obviously causing massive flooding. I love Asheville. I've been there a whole bunch of times. I know the terrain very well. I've had some fun run-ins with the Bears of Nashville, or of the Bears of Asheville, that are just kind of everywhere. It's a beautiful place. I think the death toll at this point, some are saying 200, some are saying 500, but then you see videos of people saying it's way, way worse. Now, I will tell you, with the videos that are saying it's way, way worse, I have not seen a first-hand account of that. I've not seen videos of people walking through local areas where there are people that have passed away that have not been removed or properly, taken care of. I think there is a bit of misinformation floating around about perhaps the death toll in order to make it look like the government isn't doing enough. However, residents in Asheville did not expect the severe nature of the flooding, which was a huge miss, right? I mean, this is a once in a 1,000-year type flood or storm, but this day and age, we should be able to predict this with enough certainty so that we can tell people to go. Evacuation orders were issued very, very late. That comes directly from the Washington Examiner that had a pretty good article about why Asheville wasn't told to evacuate quick enough. We've got power outages. I've heard from some people. I've got some people I know down there, 6 days without power, plus we have water that's not getting delivered. But here's where it gets crazy. You would think that with the money that we have, that we've spent on FEMA, your tax dollars that we have earmarked for federal disaster relief so that people who are affected by this can be safe. And the reason why the American taxpayers accept the existence of a FEMA is because we all feel that if a storm hit Michigan, a storm hit Georgia, a storm hit wherever you are sitting in your home, that at some point there would be a FEMA tent pretty close to you where you can grab an MRE, maybe some water, and you'd be good to go. For those who don't know, MRE, meal ready to eat, there's like FEMA rations, humanitarian rations, but at least they would be there for us. Well, not there for the people of Asheville, North Carolina. But here's the thing about our government, Sean. when the government can't fulfill its duty that we've paid for because they've decided to spend it in other ways, and we'll talk about this, you would think that they would at least let the people of Asheville take care of themselves. Well, I learned yesterday there was a helicopter pilot took off with his son. His son is old enough to do this. I don't think he's young. He starts to lift some civilians out. He gets a wife, but he only had a 2-seater, and he was going to fly missions all night like he was in Nam or something. Leaves husband with his son, so his son could take care of the husband. Drops wife off. He's told by authorities in that area that if he takes off again, he will be arrested. Now, there's a notice to airmen that goes out when an area is closed. That was not in effect at the time. He checked before he took off. That's part of FAA regulations. You check it. That was not in effect. After he was told that, he argued with the guy. He said, "You're going to just have to arrest me." And they said, "No, we're going to definitely put you in jail, and you're going to be in violation of the FAA stuff, and you're going to lose your license," which of course means then he can't fly again, so he can't run that risk. He was told to leave his son stranded with this other local because he wanted to be a human being and use his own money and his own helicopter and his own flight hours to go help out human beings. And because some bureaucratic restriction, he was told not to. What is going on in Asheville, North Carolina? Then I look at the Asheville Police Department and Asheville public websites and realize that there is a curfew in effect from 7:30 p.m. to 7:30 a.m., meaning civilians who need to walk far to get water, civilians who need to go check on their elderly neighbors, civilians who want to go out there and help somebody but come back at night so that they can find somewhere to sleep or maybe protect a business from a looter. They're not allowed to because the Asheville police is saying stay in your home. Why? There's down power lines and all that stuff, but let's quit with the parentification of people. You get to make that decision on your own. The government doesn't get to make it for you. But the reason I'm bringing all this up, Sean, is because it is absolutely abundantly clear that the reason FEMA does not have money to take care of this in Asheville is because it spent literally all of it on a program that is not related to disaster relief. FEMA stands for Federal Emergency Management, right? Federal emergencies. Undocumented immigrants are only a federal emergency if your desire is to close our border and stop it, not to feed, clothe, and house people. So Mayorkas was given a whole bunch of money by Congress from your taxpayer dollars in order to give it to people who committed a crime by crossing our border illegally, in order to house them and clothe them and feed them under the guise of disaster relief. Why? Because Congress wouldn't have given them any other money. That's the problem. I expect to see congressional hearings on this as to why FEMA can't take care of our disasters in our country and why instead it's deciding to misappropriate and fraudulently use that money under the guise of disaster relief for other purposes. The people who are dead in Asheville right now are victims of that crime, Sean.
I go back to the head of Homeland Security, which is Alejandro Mayorkas. And again, not because he's part of a Democrat or Democratic administration, but because this man has been an absolute disaster for the department and for this country.
Absolutely.
There is information out there that purports Mayorkas spent $690 million on migrants crossing into this country illegally. And in his own words, in a hearing the other day, this is not Sean Weiss saying this. This is not Ron Chapman saying this. This is in Mayorkas' own words at a hearing the other day, that FEMA doesn't have enough money.
No more money.
To make it through the remainder of the hurricane season.
Yep.
Which runs through November or mid-November.
Yep.
Because that money has been earmarked. Now, my understanding was that it was $1 billion or more. The report that I'm reading says $690 million. Now, again, that's a big swing. We're talking almost $300 million, if not more. But I think people listening to this will get the point, which is money that comes from taxpayers like us and those who are watching this program is earmarked for the Federal Emergency Program. The Federal Emergency Management Assistance Program, FEMA, is not meant for migrant crisis.
That's right. This is not an all-purpose fund. This is not a fund that is to be used however you want. And here's, for those people who may not be familiar, I mean, here's the schoolhouse rock of it all. Congress has the power. President signs something into law after Congress passes it. Maybe that says we will delegate authority to manage federal disasters to FEMA. That's exactly what happened. So FEMA is created. Boom. We're going to nestle FEMA under the Department of Homeland Security because that makes sense. Great. Then somebody's in charge of it. We're going to issue regulations for how money is to be used and your requirements for disaster relief. But here's the thing. It is up to the heads of the agency to ensure that the money is properly used for the mission that it's used for. If you donate to the Red Cross and the Red Cross decides to spend all of that donation on crack cocaine, they have misappropriated your money. Crack cocaine is an extreme example, but same thing's true here. If Congress gave money to FEMA and this wasn't part of FEMA's authority, then FEMA has misappropriated the money. But here is what FEMA has done. They have expanded the definition of what constitutes a federal emergency to arguably claim that this applies to migrants who are being released from ICE custody, which means that because there's a FEMA that allows disaster relief and FEMA has money, the irony here, Sean, is that immigrants who are released from ICE custody get better treatment than inmates who are released from federal custody or state custody in the United States because there's no FEMA dollars for those people because we don't consider that to be a disaster. All right. This is pure and simple manipulation of the federal budget. And the reason is because there is an agenda inside of some people in the federal government and obviously Mayorkas. And that agenda is to put as many voters inside of the United States as possible so that you can increase the number of votes and make it impossible, just like they just did in California, Sean, impossible to check an ID at a polling location to verify that somebody is legal. Now, if people think that that's some sort of crazy conspiracy theory, just look at what Gavin Newsom did. He just passed a law saying that you don't have to verify identification at a polling location, which means if you want to go to a pharmacy to pick up a medication, higher level of security than voting. If you want to go to a bar, higher level of security than voting. If you want to get a rental car, higher level of security than voting.
The airport.
The airport. Why do all of these other, if you want to get into a courthouse.
Yeah.
If you want to get into a state legislative building. Why are all of these things protected more than a free and fair election? And also, if you criticize the way the election is conducted, you get charged with 40-some felony offenses. That's the America that we live in, Sean. And that's just truth. I mean, that's the reality of the situation.
It's mind-boggling to me how we have allowed inch by inch to turn into miles of dysfunction. Miles of dystopia. We are at times what I would consider to be a third world country in the way that we handle things. This whole freedom of speech, and I know we covered freedom of speech previously, but I mean, this ties directly into what Gavin Newsom has just done in California by charging people, if you dare to oppose, allowing undocumented individuals who do not have the ability to present a driver's license. I mean, think about this, okay? In 2025, in order to board an airplane, you have to have your driver's license, which is now a specific type of driver's license that has different holograms, it has different bar scanners, it has biometric information. If you don't have what I think they call your true ID, you don't go through TSA. And think about this. Now, I've done it for convenience, but hell, I'm an American citizen, and I don't care who knows, where I'm from in this country. But like you, we both have TSA clear. And what did we have to do for clear? We had to give our fingerprints. We had to do a retinal scan. We had to submit to an extensive background check through the Department of Homeland Security. That's to be able to go from Detroit to Las Vegas. Okay. But to allow somebody to vote in a free and fair election, which, by the way, is going to be the most consequential election of my lifetime.
Wouldn't we want to make sure it's fair? Wouldn't we want to have security controls? Wouldn't we want external viewers on the election that we put in certain other countries to make sure that it's free and fair so that we can say it's free and fair? No, what we want to do is claim that, falsely claim that some sort of dossier, it suggests that Donald Trump has been involved and Cambridge Analytica is running ads for Donald Trump, and we want to suppress the speech of Americans, as Mark Zuckerberg indicated. And of course, we all know, do a Google search right now for the word immigration, and instead of seeing anything bad, you will see attack articles against Donald Trump and others related to immigration. I mean, I'd be very curious. You probably, I know because you search, kind of red terms sometimes, I imagine you're probably going to have different results just because of that's how it is. But what about those unbiased people that, that are just searching? What information are they getting, and how is Google framing it?
Yeah. And I think, and to your point, and then we'll get back to talking about some of these crazy statistics. I think to your point, we are finding more pragmatic people. I have adopted that term since you called me a pragmatist.
It's good. It's good.
It is because, I am a common sense, real world person that just wants to see things work the way they're supposed to.
Yep.
Right. But I think what I am seeing more now than even just 6 months ago are people that were very heavy leaning to the left, leaning very much more to the middle, and even, dare I say, some of them starting to lean a bit more to the right. I think what people are tired of hearing is that Trump is Hitler, Trump is a dictator, Trump is going to do this, do that, all these horrific things. But what people have to stop listening to, and I say this all the time, you've got to block out the noise, right? You block out the noise. One of my favorite lines in a movie is Kevin Costner in For Love of the Game, where he says, block the mechanism. And oh, by the way, the other night, 2 nights ago, I could not fall asleep. I watched Point Break.
I knew you were going to say that. As soon as you said, by the way, it just got into my brain.
The best, worst actor ever. I agree with you 100%.
Isn't it just, it's so good to watch. It's like watching your son grow up. Like, he'll make mistakes.
Johnny Utah.
He'll make mistakes, but it's okay. It's okay. Because he's growing.
It's okay, amigo.
He's getting better, Yeah. He's going to be Neo someday.
Yeah. And I'll leave it at this. I think both sides of the media need to recognize that people want the facts. And the American people, the majority of the American people, are not as dumb as the media would have you believe.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. On the just the facts phrase, so I'm working on a new book. It'll be out eventually, but I've been doing a lot of research on why these emotional appeals are working so well for people, why we've been bombarded with messages. And I went back to Daniel Kahneman, who's a behavioral economist, big emerging field. I think he's a Nobel laureate as well. And he talks about, I didn't mean to digress into this, but it's really important when we're looking at these emotional appeals, why people are being moved emotionally as opposed to sitting down with us for an hour and hearing some facts. Daniel Kahneman talks about system one and system two thinking, and this is going to be thoroughly described in the book and really connected to some of the emotional rhetoric that we've seen in our society and why it's working. I really get into the psychology of this. But system one thinking is that type of reflexive thinking where we are jumping to emotional conclusions. And the reason why we're doing that is because there's so much information coming at us that we can't process it. And so we try to make judgments on it quicker and quicker and quicker. And Americans are getting much quicker at making snap judgments on information and closing their mind off to the rest because there's so much information out there and it's hard to break through it. The book is really about the way to break through that so that we can truly understand our society. And it's first blocking out a lot of the noise, right? If you don't want to learn about immigration today, then just listen to this a little bit later, right? If you're trying to work and listen to this and maybe it's going to bounce off, that's the only time where you're going to be able to process an emotional appeal when you're like multitasking and all of that. Don't do that. Just sit down, read a book, listen to us, whatever you might want to do, and learn a little bit. System two thinking is that thinking where you're actually processing something. So when it comes to forming the judgments that we form about our world and making informed decisions to vote, I would hope that Americans out there are using system two thinking. And that is, let me look at the facts, let me distill it a little bit. But instead, what we're getting from both sides is a lot of system one messaging. Now, what you saw during the debate with J.D. Vance and Tim Walz is two system two thinkers talking to each other. All right. I will give Walz that. He's a system two thinker.
I agree.
That was factual. What you saw with Kamala Harris and Donald Trump is a masterful system one advocator, right? Emotional appeal. Here's a good example. And this is written about in the book. He's debating with Ben Carson in 2015 for the 2016 election. He's not through the primary. They're asked a question. We could probably play this briefly. They're asked a question about autism and vaccines. That was a big deal back then, right? Autism and vaccines. Ben Carson's like, there's no evidence of this. And he's a doctor. So you would think that from a system two perspective, he has authority, he has a medical degree, he's been a well-respected doctor. You probably have to go with that if you're going to make a judgment about content here. Donald Trump then says, I don't know. I think these vaccines might be potentially harmful. We just don't know. That's agnostic, right? But it's harmful. I don't know. Agnostic. And then he's distancing himself. And then he says, there's this employee that I have and her daughter went for a vaccine and, blah, blah, blah. And she's got autism now. You have to look at the clip to see what he says specifically. I don't want to misquote him.
We've had so many instances, people that worked for me just the other day, 2 years old, 2.5 years old, a beautiful child, went to have the vaccine and came back and a week later got a tremendous fever, got very, very sick, now is autistic.
What he did was he took an anecdotal story that had a fear message for all Americans. If you want your daughter to potentially come back with autism, I don't know. That's masterful. Now, I don't hate the player, he's playing the game. Everybody is system one messaging, but y'all need to cut through that. And we're going to give you some system two thinking when it comes to immigration. And the first thing I want to address on that note with respect to the debates, Sean, is this claim about Kamala Harris being tapped as the border czar and her subsequent backpedaling related to her duties. She was the border czar. We know this. There is an executive order that gives her the role and responsibility. Now, one of the first things that she did as a presidential candidate was back away from a specific delegation that her president of the United States gave her. She said, I wasn't really the border czar. That was just kind of, ceremonial or whatever. But here's the reality. So after being tapped as the border czar, Kamala Harris traveled near the southern border for the first time on June 25th, 2021. She decided to travel to El Paso. And for those people who aren't from Texas, that's about 800 miles from the lower Rio Grande, right? The United States Border Patrol chief at the time, Raul Ortiz, stated that during his 2 years in the position, He has never had one conversation with the president or the vice president. He was chief of Border Patrol and commanded 21,000 people. The commander in charge of 21,000 people at the border has not had a single conversation with the person who was tapped as the border czar. In May 2024, this is according to the border chief, there were 170,723 illegal immigrant encounters at the United States southern border, a 185% increase for the average May encounter total under President Trump. That's coming from the chief, who the United States and the president of the United States has agreed should be allowed to command 21,000 people at the border. He is an unimpeachable person from the left or the right, right?
That's right.
And he's spitting facts in 1 month, 170,000 illegal immigrant encounters. Okay. Now, Kamala's the border chief. And let me just back up really quick. Before she becomes the border chief, the first thing President Biden does is sit down and unsign. He took out his whiteout and just traced it along the executive orders and said, those are no longer executive orders. Actually, what you really do is you just sign a new executive order repealing the others. But Donald Trump signed Executive Order 13767 on January 25th, 2017. Remember, he had lower crossings. Biden is responsible for a 185% increase. Trump had a lower crossing during his presidency. He signed this border security and immigration enforcement improvement. This executive order, if you care to read it, ladies and gentlemen, is proof that the president with the stroke of a pen can drastically change this crisis. Biden has blamed Donald Trump for blocking Congress. Kamala Harris, during the debate, claimed that Donald Trump somehow blocked Congress, even though he was in no office at the time at all. But there is a federal registry entry of Donald Trump's executive order, and it dictated construction of a wall. It increased enforcement and detention of undocumented immigrants. Executive Order 13768 broadened the categories of what is considered an undocumented immigrant and prioritized them for deportation. He also threatened to withhold federal funding from sanctuary cities. We'll get into what a sanctuary city actually is. But he said, if you do this, you're not going to get federal funding, which is completely appropriate. Biden's response to that executive order was Executive Order 13993. And he essentially disbanded the expansion of interior immigration enforcement priorities. These were written on January 20th, 2021. January 20th, 2021, Biden, with the stroke of a pen, dismantles all of that, appoints an ineffective vice president as the border czar who ignores the border. And that is the number one issue for the American public, according to every single poll right now before this election, is how good of a job is the person who is tapped as a border czar doing when they are responsible for, what was the percentage increase? 180% increase, I think we found.
180.
185% increase. So how's that in terms of job approval? I mean, Kamala Harris is looking much more like the CEO of Boeing that we discussed in the last episode. She wants a raise, but she didn't do her job.
100%. And since we're on this specific topic, I want to go ahead and add to this, because in May of this year, the House Committee on Homeland Security released its April fact sheet, outlining the April 2024 U.S. Customs Borders Protection encounter data. Okay, so this is the encounter data. Again, the southwest border, as we were talking about, exceeded 179,000 in a month. And then at the northern border, which there's not enough people talking about this, and I'll give you some stats on this here in a minute.
I'm guarding the northern border, Sean. I'm over here. We're good. Yeah, we got it.
We had a total of 247,000 encounters between the southern and northern border. So let me just give this to you. One of the most revealing statistics revealed by CBP was the encounters at the southwest border ports of entry in April 2024 grew nearly 100% compared to April of 2021. This is evident through the number of appointments scheduled through the CBP One mass parole scheme, which skyrocketed to more than 591,000 since January of 2023. In addition, more than 434,000 inadmissible aliens have arrived in the U.S. since the official launch of the CHNV mass parole program, with the majority arriving through Florida, Texas, New York, and California airports as DHS documents obtained by the committee, but only through subpoenas. And the last thing that I'll share with you is this. The report goes on to say, and then I'll make sure that we provide this fact sheet, because it is from the House Committee on Homeland Security. So we know that this is a government document, and, from my perspective, I want to be able to say that I can rely on statistics, from the government. Here's the part that I was just getting to. Encounters at the northern border in April fiscal year 24 increased 1,240% compared to April of fiscal year 21. For the second month in a row, encounters along the busiest sector of the northern border, which is the Swanton sector, hit their highest total on CBP record, 1,470. In fact, in the final week of April, the Swanton sector reported the apprehension of 220 illegal aliens, the highest number of weekly arrests on the sector's record.
Yeah. Let's go into that phrase encounters. We've used it a lot. I want to define it for people. It's a term of art. And, Mario found us something kind of amazing here. I'm going to put a chart up that shows why this border situation is getting so bad in a second here. And it comes from usafacts.org. This will be down in the show notes. You can check it. By the way, all of the information I just told you about the 185% increase, that came from congress.gov. This is not a news site. This is not spin. This is the congressional website. This is the information that Congress people look at. But let's take a look at the USA Facts definition of what a border encounter is. That comes from Title 8. Okay, that covers this. A border encounter, it's not just, hey, how you doing? All right. It's an apprehension. People who are normally detained by U.S. Border Patrol, they're supposed to be, if there's an apprehension, there's somebody who's seeking legal admission at a port of entry that is not admissible. Okay. But we know that this increase in encounters is not from that fact alone, because obviously the lines at our borders are not swelling. It's people crossing where there isn't a crossing. All right, that's the problem. Then the next thing is expulsions. Those are considered encounters as well. So we have apprehensions. Now, in order for something to be an encounter, remember 185% increase if we just compare the two Mays. In order for something to be an apprehension, you have to get a hold of them. How many crossings are there where there was no apprehension, where they got away? Well, with our underfunded Border Patrol lacking staff at the border, which is a fact, we can only assume that these numbers are way higher than what they purport to be right now. Let's just think about this logically. We'll use our System 2 hats. If Donald Trump signed an executive order to put more people on the border, and then Biden took people away from the border by getting rid of that executive order, which is exactly what happened, that is not in dispute, then there are less people at the border for apprehensions. Therefore, less people to satisfy that encounter requirement, which means more people streaming across our border, which means that 185% increase could be a 285% or 585. I won't speculate, but logic tells us that it must be significantly higher. Now, when we look at the encounters alone, we're going to put this chart up for you from usafacts.org, where we can clearly see that when Title 42 ended, which was the ability to expel people as a result of COVID-19, the president had the authority to do that, despite that he claims he doesn't now. He had the authority to do that. When Title 42 ends, we immediately see a massive decrease in the amount of apprehensions at our border. And what does that tell us? That tells us they're still crossing, but they're not picking them up. They're not apprehending them. They're not taking care of the problem. And so the monthly nationwide border encounters from October 2019 all the way to June 2024, right? We've had more people streaming across the border and less people to actually apprehend them. Now, when it comes to apprehension, and I don't want to get too far afield here, Sean, but it used to be the case that when we would apprehend somebody at the border, we would send them back or we prosecute them.
Absolutely.
Used to be the case. Used to be the case that we would follow the law in the United States. Used to be the case that when the DEA makes marijuana a Schedule 1 controlled substance, they have a requirement to arrest and detain and prosecute people who are doing it. But we decided that without Congress changing the law into something that makes sense, we are just not going to follow it. Used to be the case that you couldn't earmark funding for immigrant spending when it was for disaster relief. But of course, we decided to make up our own definitions. It used to be the case that we had something called rule of law in this country. But those people who've decided to rule on good intentions, as opposed to the text of the law that the American people have voted people in office to care about, as a result, what we get is people like Mayorkas being able to wave his scepter and do whatever he wants. And whatever they want here is this absolutely ridiculous sanctuary city issue. So we have a New York City mayor who was just indicted. Love this. I love it when they eat their own, right? New York City Mayor Adams, just indicted for being critical about the sanctuary city issue in New York. The reality is that people are being bussed up to cities that are required to take care of these people as a condition, I guess, of whatever they signed up for, but they're also spending their own local dollars to take care of this. So here's how sanctuary cities work, and this is coming from globalrefuge.org. Again, Mario makes sure that we only stay on credible sites and he checks them for facts and figures. But for those people who don't really know what happens with sanctuary cities, we have initial contact with law enforcement. Somebody is crossing the border and there's one of these apprehensions. Remember, that's going to be artificially low because we don't have enough people at the border. And we're certainly down a Kamala Harris at the border, right? Because she's the border czar. This is common. Officer pulling a car over for speeding or responding to a domestic incident. These days, they say you're not supposed to check immigration status when you pull people over, so we have less apprehensions there as a result. But then for some reason, law enforcement detains the individual. They take custody. They take fingerprints. ICE regulations require that this information is shared. If the person is undocumented and there's no other criminal proceedings against them, they will go into ICE custody. ICE will send a request to the local jail and say, hey, you have him on a legal hold. That's cleared. He's now on an ICE hold. He always has been, he or she. Transfer them to ICE custody. ICE custody isn't a special thing. There's beds in certain jails and whatnot for ICE custody. So they can't detain an individual more than 48 hours beyond the time that they were supposed to be released. And this gives ICE a buffer to seek a warrant or begin the deportation process. Okay. So then, according to U.S. Department and Homeland Security, that's how it's supposed to work. According to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, local officers do not have to comply with the ICE hold request anymore.
Which is absolutely mind-boggling.
Isn't that insane? Rule of law. Remember, I mentioned this. We have laws for a reason. And if Congress wants to change the law, they get to change the law. We don't allow bureaucrats. We don't allow the executive to change the law. The executive swears to uphold the law, which means, I always use this as an example. Obama should have said, Congress, marijuana is illegal. The voters don't like that. Change it. But if you don't, I'm going to have to raid every dispensary across the United States and start burning shit. Because that's what the law is, and I have to uphold the law. Please don't make me do that. And change the law. Then what happens? We have a common sense law on the books. and people who own legal dispensaries. I mean, I'm not a big fan, but that's fine. People who own legal dispensaries can have a bank account. They can transact. They can pay their taxes the right way. All that stuff would be great if we upheld the law. This is what we're doing here. We don't like the law because we can't get Congress to change it. And so we do the most undemocratic thing you could possibly do in the United States. You make up your own law and violate the existing law. So according to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Mayorkas's department, local officers, that means city, state officers, do not have to comply in sanctuary cities with ICE requests because doing so is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Now, Scalia, God rest his soul, would have some very, very strong words, probably some poetic strong words. He was great
very much so.
For anybody who says, hi, I'm a bureaucrat from an agency and I get to interpret the Constitution, and this is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Do you know what department's job, what section of the government's job it is to interpret the Constitution? Marbury versus Madison? Anyone?
None.
It's the judicial branch, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
a judicial branch, but not a department of
department of bureaucracy, right?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. The Fourth Amendment, if our statutes regarding immigration holds were a violation of the Fourth Amendment, then Mayorkas has effectively determined that an entire statute passed by Congress has no force and effect because it's a violation of the Constitution. He's done so without a Supreme Court decision on point and without talking to Congress. All right. The fact that anybody can even utter sanctuary city right now in the United States and not immediately have the federal government, boots on the ground, involved in their refusal to comply with the law. The fact that the federal government isn't suing every state that is involved in sanctuary cities or ripping federal funding away from them by saying you're not upholding the law that you promised to uphold. That is a violation of the rule of law. And that's why our country is getting destroyed. How does Congress act?
Here's the problem. Because the laws on the books aren't the laws that they want to enforce because they don't benefit them.
Good intentions, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So let me throw some other crazy statistics at you. I've been itching on this one.
Before you do,
right?
Sean,
yeah,
we're going to launch a merch brand. Okay. That's coming, right? You know.
Yep.
And I think that good intentions is probably just the first shirt that we're going to do. What do you think? Just
not click to survive.
Okay, we could do click to survive. Yeah, but
I'm good either way.
I want a Reagan good intentions shirt because I think it's important that we all violate the law because of our good intentions. But go ahead.
I'm with you. I'm with you. All right. So I want to go back to the Homeland Security that we were talking about just a few moments ago. And this comes from the chairman, Mark Green from Maryland. And I'm just going to throw some of this at you. And some of this I didn't even know until today. Okay. So since President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas took office, there have been more than 9.5 million encounters nationwide and more than 7.8 million encounters at the southwest border. But nearly 2 million known gotaways have evaded U.S. Border Patrol under this administration. And in testimony before the committee last year, then Chief of the U.S. Border Patrol, Raul Ortiz, who you were talking about just a little while ago, said the total number of gotaways could be undercounted by as much as 20%.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
As much
they
as
don't
20%.
know where any of these people went. They have no idea.
No.
We'll talk about why that is. Yeah.
Well, remember, we're missing 320,000 minors right now, which is insane. But hang on, I'm going to get there. In April, nationwide border encounters by the Office of Field Operations, which is the OFO at ports of entry, 116,771 increased 28% to April of fiscal year 23, and then tenfold compared to April of 2021. What happened in 2021?
COVID?
Well, no. Who took over?
Oh, yeah. Oh, Joseph R. Biden.
Yeah. The whiteout.
Took over is such
All
a
right.
strong word when we're talking about President Biden. Did
okay.
he take anything over? Did he like accept responsibility for anything?
Maybe an ice cream
Or
parlor.
did he become the it's Trump's fault
Yeah.
machine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But here, the numbers get better. 41,400 inadmissible aliens with CBP One app appointments were processed by the OFO. Since January of 2023, 591,000 individuals have scheduled appointments with the app. 95.8% of all inadmissible aliens who scheduled appointments through the app from January through September of 23 were ultimately released into the United States on parole. Do you think these people are going to show up to their parole hearings? They don't even. Anyways, I'm going to hold there because we said that we're just going to use facts.
Yeah, no, it's important.
Here's one that's even better. You ready for this one?
Yeah.
So far in 2024, and this is up until May, okay? 27,496 Chinese nationals have been encountered illegally crossing the southwest border between ports of entry. Illegal apprehensions of Chinese nationals in April 2024 increased, you ready for this? 2,147% compared to April of 2022. In fiscal year 24, encounters have surpassed all of last fiscal year. And this was only at April. Since the program began, there's been 434,800 Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans have been mass paroled under the administration's CHNV parole program. And then according to documents obtained by the committee, as of mid-October 2023, there were 1.6 million inadmissible aliens awaiting travel authorizations through the CHNV program. I am absolutely mortified with what these numbers are. And this was only the first quarter of 2024. Here we are now, 33 days from an election. I would love to see what those numbers have morphed into. Now, according to some of the numbers, right, the Biden administration, when Joseph R. Biden was the presumptive nominee, got very nervous about the numbers at the border because it became the number one or number two issue for all Americans.
And right now it's number one. That's what they said
and it
during the
is.
debate. Yeah.
62% of all Americans, forget about whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, 62% of all Americans are in favor of mass deportation.
Well, yeah, they're in favor of it because now they're actually feeling the pain budget-wise of what this is costing. And I'd like to get into the budget, but there's one thing that, I'm going to be honest with you, Sean, a lot of this stuff has been confusing even for me. I have been to the border. I was in the military. I've worked on some missions related to border issues. We've talked about why the military can't get involved in the border in certain contexts, but there's a lot of legal issues that I've dealt with in other contexts at the border. But there's this policy that I really wanted to understand, and that is the Remain in Mexico policy. I've heard it villainized quite a bit, and I wanted to look for myself because I wasn't really focused on border issues back when this was going on. But the Remain in Mexico policy, it's specifically called the Migrant Protection Protocol, MPP, was something that Donald Trump initiated during his administration. He did it the right way. I believe it was through executive order. And it required something very important. Remember, towards the end of Obama's term, we had people streaming through the Darien Gap and coming to the border because I think they were thinking that if Donald Trump got elected, that people wouldn't be able to get in anymore, rightly so. And so there were these huge backups at the border, and there was a crisis. Well, Donald Trump wanted to make it very clear that if you try to cross and you seek asylum, that you have to remain in Mexico for the duration of your asylum. The goal was to reduce the number of people in the United States. And here's the reality. The United States is not like Chili's. We don't give you a beeper when you get there and say your reservation is ready when we beep you, or we'll call your cell phone, and then you come back and just make sure that it's okay for you to get to the table. Now, I think that that would be a really nice way to do it, but we're not going to let you sit at a table and eat while we wait for your reservation to come up. That doesn't make much sense to anybody. So the policy allowed tens of thousands of migrants to be in Mexico, but the reality is these people came through. Most of them weren't Mexican. They were from southern areas. They were from South America.
They were from Venezuela. They were from Ecuador. They were from, you're right, 100%. And they were from places like China, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Turkestan, places where they don't like us very much.
Well, that's true. And here's the other thing. This is a problem for Mexico because you have people coming through their border, which Trump wanted to strengthen as well through this law, to get to the United States so they can get through our border. When people learn the border's closed, the reason why I brought up Obama is because when people learn the border might close, they change the way that they act, right? And so when people know that the border might close, they change the way that they act. What's happening in the Darien Gap right now, if there was a live webcam feed, you would see a whole bunch of people crossing this area that's very hard to control because they know that if Trump gets into office, there's going to be a remain in Mexico policy, and I bet Mexico's getting ready for it. They can set up, if they let people stream through their southern border to get to the United States, that's their problem. That's not ours. They can set up tents if they want to. They can set up humanitarian rations for people to take care of them. That's up to Mexico. That's not up to the United States, but we give them enough money to do it. But here's the thing with remain in Mexico. This was passed through Title 42. In 2021, the Biden administration tried to end the program, but of course there were lawsuits. The case ultimately went through the lower courts and the Supreme Court. And in June 2022, the Supreme Court ruled that the Biden administration had the authority to end the policy. They determined that, despite everybody saying this court is just one-sided and only Trump, they determined that the president has the power to cause remain in Mexico to be alive or to kill it. And this is a very important thing. Biden sought to go to the Supreme Court about remain in Mexico to ensure he had presidential power and authority. The Supreme Court granted it to him. And what does he tell the American people immediately after it's granted? I can't do it. Congress has got to do it. What does Kamala Harris keep saying? I can't do it. Congress has got to do it. And Donald Trump stopped Congress.
But what did Trump say during the debate with Harris? Listen, you can fix this problem right now. You don't need to get a promotion to another high-level job when you haven't done your job. You can leave here right now, go back to that big, beautiful white building on Pennsylvania Avenue, and you can get your pen out and you can sign an executive order to close the border. He was 100% right. And it boggles my mind how many things this guy has actually said that he wound up being right on.
Ended up being right. I mean, it's completely wrong. You listen, Kamala could go to walk over to John Roberts' chambers and say, hey, John, that 2022 decision, did it give me the ability to issue an executive order while I'm running for president right now? Talk to Joe, slide it in front of him, just tell him it's a birthday card for one of his kids, and then get him to sign it. I think he'd sign it. Joe just said yesterday that people in Asheville are very, very happy. That's what he said. He said,
"Did you hear him?"
He said they're getting all that they're getting everything that they need. They're very, very happy. I'm happy to hear that Joe believes they're happy because that means he's at peace, and that's really where he should be right now. I just want Joe to be peaceful and happy.
Well, listen, the one thing that I saw, I guess it was about a week ago, when he was supposed to announce Prime Minister, I believe it was the Prime Minister of India.
Yeah.
And he said, "Who's next? Who's next?"
Yeah, that was good. That was great. No, I swear, I thought it was Clint Eastwood working on like another movie. You know, Clint Eastwood's still directing, I guess. He's like 91 years
97
old.
or something.
97. Right? He's still directing. He's like, maybe he's going to star Jimmy Carter in the movie. I don't know. I think Jimmy Carter just turned 100. Happy birthday, Jimmy.
Oh, I thought he passed away. Is Jimmy Carter still alive?
He's in hospice right now.
Well, I knew he was in hospice, but I thought that, well, boy, it shows you where I've been.
I think he just turned 100. I'm pretty sure I heard that. I was like quite astounded that we have a president who was, you know, it's the 70s, right? I mean, and he's still kicking. But hey, live fact check me on that, like NBC, Sean. I'm looking forward to it. Live fact check me, which means you have to give me the wrong answer.
I can't give you the wrong answer, man. The longest living former U.S. president, Jimmy Carter, turns 100 3 days ago.
Yeah.
Wow. I thought the guy was dead.
October 1st. Isn't that crazy?
Now, I'll share with you something.
Mm-hmm.
So I was never a Jimmy Carter fan based on history, right?
Yeah,
because I think about what transpired, you know, with the Olympics and the terrorists. You know, the hijacking and all of that. So several years ago, I was on an airplane going from Atlanta, and I forget where we were going. And we're kind of delayed a few minutes. And all of a sudden, here come these 3 Secret Service guys. And I knew they were Secret Service because when I looked up, they had their lapel pin. And they were all dressed identical in their black suits, and they had their earpiece in. And I was sitting on the aisle, and the one guy said to me, this is a hands to God true story. The one guy said to me, I need you to move to the window. And I looked at him, I said, I'm not moving to the window. I don't sit on the window. I don't like the window. I booked an aisle seat, and I was in one seat. And he said, sir, I need you to move. All of a sudden I hear this voice say, hey, it's okay. Let him be. Take your seat. And I look up, and it was Jimmy Carter.
Flying commercial?
He was just heading over to South Africa or to Africa, wherever he was going on one of his humanitarian causes. So, you know, so literally he looked at me and he said, young man, if you want to stay in your seat, that's totally fine with me. He said, they just like to have me in an area where if I need to. And I said, Mr. President, for you, I will move. This is a God's honest true story.
And how many times did you fly on Epstein's plane?
We're not going there. So
I got flight logs, man. I got them.
Yeah,
I'll just have to look. Yeah.
Just like the flight logs in A Few Good Men, right?
That's right. I got
Airman Rodriguez
in the back of the courtroom ready to testify.
That's right.
Listen, everybody out there, if you want to laugh your absolute butt off, Google A Few Silent Men. You have to. It is a rendition of A Few Good Men where they only choose the silent parts and clip them together so it looks like a silent cross-examination. Funniest thing. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No. But anyways, I said, Mr. President, for you, I will move. He said, young man, what's your name? I said, Sean Weiss, sir. He said, shook my hand, said, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Wow.
He said, I'll take my seat on the window. And I said, nope, I'm going to move over. I've already angered a Secret Service guy. But before he sat down, do you know what he did? He went to every single person on that airplane and shook their hand and said, hello, I am former President Jimmy Carter. And this was a Boeing 757. And he walked to every single seat, to every single person. And after he came from the last row, I don't think there was one person who did not applaud him. I mean, the plane literally, people were clapping.
What year was this?
I want to say it was the early 2000s, 2001, 2002.
I was thinking it would have had to be before 9/11 because I just feel like with security after 9/11, I just couldn't imagine anybody letting a former president do that now.
Yeah, maybe it was just before that, but I think it was the early 2000s, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
But he had 3 Secret Service guys with him on that flight. And It was really an incredible experience. I mean, I have I have had the opportunity to meet former presidents in the past because of our mutual friend, Robert Lyles, who has consistently allowed me to attend the Black Tie and Boots Gala for the Republican conference in Texas. Well,
Yeah.
from Texas in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
It's usually been at the Peabody Hotel, but they've moved it the last few years.
That sounds
But anyways,
like fun.
sorry, I digressed away from all that stuff. Let's get back in. Let's finish out some of these crazy statistics.
Yeah, I think that there's still a lot more to talk about here. So one thing that we haven't gone over is this issue with Governor Greg Abbott and the border. Using National Guard at the border is really the problem. So remember, we talked about rule of law, and that's really what we would encapsulate all of this into. We have laws that protect our border. We have presidential power and executive authority that will allow to protect our border. But Biden doesn't want to use the presidential power he spent all of the money for to go to the Supreme Court and fight for his presidential power. He wants to pretend that he doesn't have it. And then he doesn't want to enforce the law on the books. And instead, he wants to allow Secretary Mayorkas to violate the law. So this really comes down to rule of law. But here's the thing. When you violate the rule of law, Sean, there are downstream consequences, especially to states. And our system of government, we need to understand this. This is not a democracy. Democracy doesn't work. We know that. This is a republic, right? It's a representative democracy. And so basically that means that we have a governing document, the Constitution. We have laws. We also have a division of government where people are supposed to uphold those laws. But then there's also federalism that we need to think about. We are really just a collection of independent states with a United States umbrella over the top of us to make sure that the states play nicely. That's really what's supposed to happen. The federal government's not really supposed to be as powerful as it pretends to be. We can blame the Commerce Clause and the Dormant Commerce Clause for all of that. So when the president and Secretary Mayorkas, director of the Department of Homeland Security, does not follow the law, then a governor of a southern state says, well, I need to make my own law and I need to do something different, right? Because the federal government is not respecting the law. And this is the battle between Greg Abbott and the federal government right now. So March 12th, the U.S. Supreme Court temporarily blocked Texas Senate Bill 4, which would allow state police to arrest individuals suspected of illegally crossing the border. Why? Because the Supreme Court said, again, a majority conservative Supreme Court that cares about presidential power, they said, this is something that is within the power of the executive to detain and deport undocumented immigrants. That's their responsibility. This belongs to the federal government. The president has the power. Despite the fact that Biden keeps saying he doesn't have it, the Supreme Court keeps saying, bro, this is your territory. Take care of it, man. Because we stopped Greg, but you got to do your job. And who's going to hold you responsible? Hopefully the American voters, and the reason for this podcast episode right here. But Samuel Alito then extended the stay of that blocking of the bill until March 18th, overruling a decision from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. So Alito, again, you would think somebody who's going to defend a Republican, Greg Abbott, he stopped it. All right. Then July 2023, the state of Texas instilled a 1,000-foot floating barrier on the Rio Grande near Eagle Pass, one of the nation's busiest hotspots for illegal border crossings. And what they said in the filings, what the government said, what ICE said, what Biden said in the filings in order to stop Texas from being able to even protect its own border, is they said, Texas, this isn't your land, this is our land. This isn't your border, this is our border. These aren't your people, these are our people. And you can't protect your border because that's our responsibility. But of course, we've decided not to do that. We have sanctuary city laws. We're not deploying the National Guard. We're not doing all of that. So Abbott tries to set up this border and it immediately gets blocked by the Supreme Court. Well, by the Fifth Circuit's okay with it, but the Supreme Court's got problems with it. And so that sets up the border problem. Now, in response to that, Greg Abbott said, I'm going to deploy the National Guard, which is under his state authority, to the border, which means that we would have the ability then to stop these people using our own forces. Okay, if you don't want me to erect this, we're going to use our people. The irony, let me go back to what the administration said in response to Greg Abbott's floating barrier. They made up a whole bunch of stories about people dying as a result of him trying to protect the border, which was the most insane thing. When you actually read the briefs, it's talking about how, these crossings occurred and this person died in a flooded river. And Abbott's attorneys are like, wait a second, we're trying to stop them from crossing dangerous rivers because we don't have the people to go in there and save them. And we're tired of risking lives on this messy situation that you're not doing anything about. Greg Abbott is trying to do his best. So what he said was, fine, federal government, I'm going to activate the National Guard. And a lot of other states said, we are going to do the same thing. Here's, from an attorney who's dealt with deploying the National Guard and what's required, here's the ground law on that. The states have the ability to deploy the National Guard, but the federal government has the ability to federalize them. At any point in time, President Biden could say, I want the National Guard on the border, and that can happen. They can come under federal authority and get federal dollars. In fact, in Asheville, North Carolina, the National Guard could be deployed with federal dollars, not even FEMA money. Some of it might be, but federal dollars to hand out rations, keep people safe, run helicopter operations. There's tens of thousands of National Guardsmen who would love to help some of their fellow citizens out. And they would do the same thing on the border. So here's how this would play out. And this could happen if there's another administration, if Kamala takes over. The day that Kamala Harris is inaugurated, or maybe even the day after the election, Greg Abbott is probably like, screw this. I'm going to do what I need to do. He deploys the National Guard to the border. A whole bunch of other states say, us too. And we basically have a human chain across the border with sensors and the ability to capture and detain. And the Supreme Court said, you probably can't do that, but there are some things the National Guard could do if operating under state authority. Well, once that happens, if Kamala or Biden is aggressive, the first thing that they will do is federalize those troops. They will make them under federal control. And then a federal order would go out saying, hey, state National Guard commander, you are now under federal authority. It's basically like, I'm the captain now.
Look at me, sure. I'm the captain now.
Right? That's the way it's going to be. And as a result, those troops would have to follow federal orders. I'm sure that Greg Abbott is smart enough to not deploy the National Guard unless he's got verification from those commanders that they are not going to follow an illegal order coming from the President of the United States, whoever that might be, saying you are to leave the border. Okay? Because you're not allowed to federalize the National Guard unless certain conditions are met. And here's the irony. Nobody has talked about this before, Sean. I really wanted to talk about it here because I am absolutely an authority in this area. I know the law. I've looked at it thoroughly. But Biden has claimed that there's no issue at the border, right? He's claimed that he doesn't need to stop it. But he would have to declare an emergency in order to federalize the troops and put them on the border and take them away from state control. And that would be an unlawful order coming from Biden, because declaring an emergency to specifically tell troops to pull back from the border is not a lawful order towards the National Guard. And those troops are rightfully Greg Abbott. I don't say this lightly, but if there is a civil war in this country, Sean, that's how it will start. I promise you. That's exactly how it's going to go. Take these words down. If we get there, that's exactly what's going to happen. That's why we're talking about immigration. That's why this is so important, because unless we get on top of this, we're going to have this National Guard situation. And it's going to happen with the governors of at least 9, maybe 13 states, I believe. We're going to go along with this. And that is enough to really cause some problems. And I don't want to see our country go there.
No, I don't either. And I agree with you. I think you're going to see Kristi Noem. I think, those governors in that part of the country. I think it'll be, Burgum, if I got his name correctly, from North Dakota. You'll have Nome, South Dakota. You'll have Texas. It'll be really interesting to see, these governors and what they do, because this crisis is unmanageable. And, you were talking about sanctuary cities, and real quick, while you were talking, I went back through and I actually found an email that I sent to my wife. The flight with Jimmy Carter was June 8th of 2017. I was going from Atlanta to Washington, D.C.
Wow. So he was in his 90s still.
92 years old.
92 years old, walking the aisles. That's amazing.
Unlike some people, when they make a mistake on, their time frame for when they're in a certain place, and they say, I'm just a knucklehead, I get caught up in the rhetoric. Nope. I had my date wrong. I said the early 2000s. I was wrong. You were right to call me out and say, you sure wasn't before the public health emergency. June 8th, 2017, Atlanta to Washington, D.C.
I meant to say, I thought it was before 9/11 because airplane security would have drastically changed. I thought the only way that Jimmy was getting on.
Oh, you did say 9/11. You did say 9/11.
Pre 9/11, yeah.
What did I say?
I'm actually quite shocked that he's flying commercial post 9/11. Failings of the U.S. Secret Service. Why are we making Jimmy Carter fly? You give a general an airplane as a matter of course in the military. What's going on?
Wait. Robert Ray, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, flies on a G550.
What are we doing? Jimmy Carter deserves an airplane. Get this man an airplane right now.
And that's where
his plane. We took it, didn't we?
And he had, and if you heard his congressional testimony,
just clean it.
Yeah, if you heard his congressional testimony, Ray, he said every single flight that he takes, including those with his family, when he left the hearing early and he lied to Josh Hawley about why he was leaving, was for a personal family vacation on a G550, which I think is like a $50-60 million jet. But anyways, I digress.
We need an audit now. I want Elon Musk to be in charge of the bureaucratic spending, because G5 rides going out to these sorts of people, I am not paying my taxes for that. And listen, we are so far from a tea party right now, right? We're so far from taxes on tea. We have got misuse of government funding going to undocumented immigrants, as we've just discussed. We've got it going to airplanes. We've got it going to ridiculous investigations. We've got it going to Biden, who fights all the way up to the Supreme Court for presidential power that he claims he doesn't have. I mean, this is just nonsensical. It's abusive. We've also not got the ability to save our people in Asheville while we're giving $30 billion or whatever it is to Ukraine because we care about them more. It is the most insane thing I have ever seen, Sean.
And listen, to Fox News or Newsmax or, whichever channel is going to pick us up and syndicate us and put us on TV. Listen, I don't need a Gulfstream. I'll fly commercial. Just, put me in first class every once in a blue moon. But if you want, I'll even fly on a Citation. I'll fly on a Citation.
You and I are going to get a King Air. I've already arranged this. We're going to get a King Air.
I do like King Airs.
We'll take turns. It's fine.
It's got to be a 400. It's got to be a King Air 400.
I just need 2 engines and a place to sleep in the back and room for a dog. We have to have a dog up there. But yeah, we'll just
absolutely
travel on the King Air. Nice and modest. I found one that was seized in a government auction for not too much. We just got to fix it up. So
listen, the repairs of those things could cost more than the purchase of that. But look, here's the thing. I think the Biden administration has put themselves or backed themselves into a corner where they don't have many good options, if any. The tough talk by Kamala Harris or Kamala, I don't want to get called bad names for pronouncing her name wrong. I mean, if you want to call me a bad name, you got to call Joe Biden a bad name because I don't even know what he calls her. But Vice President Harris is is in a really bad position right now because, again, this is an individual who is part of a machine. Okay. She is not going to have any control, irrespective of what anybody thinks. And when people start talking about, Kamala Harris is going to ruin the country, Kamala Harris isn't going to ruin anything, because Kamala Harris isn't going to have the opportunity to make any decisions as president of the United States. She is part of a machine that is controlled by people like Soros and his son. I mean, listen, Tim Walz is even caught up. Where was he? He was in the penthouse of Soros's son in New York City. This is the machine. This is the cabal. These are the people, the globalists, the shadow people who are making these determinations. It wasn't Joe Biden who wanted to open the border. Go back and look at people like Bill Gates and George Soros and George Clooney and all of these others who talk about open borders, a open society, a globalist society. Folks, that's socialism. And socialism hasn't worked. It hasn't worked in the Eastern Bloc of Europe. Communism hasn't worked for the most part in the Eastern Bloc of Europe. It hasn't worked in Venezuela. Socialism hasn't worked pretty much in any place that has been. Now, some people may want to talk about, some small, tiny little countries where, there is a form of socialism with, healthcare or whatever, and it's working. But you have to look at those nations and you have to realize that they are significantly more healthy than what we are as Americans here.
Let me give you an example, Sean. Norway, my favorite country on the planet, Norway, socialist. I'm okay with the right kind of socialism. Here's the deal with Norway. I talk about this a bit in the book as well. Norway has a policy where everybody gets to know what everybody makes. And the reason for that is to make sure that everybody's paying taxes. Then you get a speeding ticket. Your speeding ticket is actually based on how much you make in terms of income. They tax very heavily, but they ensure that every single person pays it. They have secured their borders to ensure that nobody's getting in without paying their fair share. And you have to pay your fair share if you're involved in their system. It's a government that is connected to the people and gives benefit to the people, and the people care about the benefit they receive. They are not in rat-filled, decrepit jails if they commit a crime. They are not getting crappy versions of healthcare like we get with Medicare and Medicaid because they won't spend enough. They are living a very, very happy life, and the government cares about protecting the happiness of the people in Norway, which makes a good society. Socialism on those terms, great. Socialism in a society that doesn't take responsibility for itself and allows people to live on the fringes of society without paying for the things that overweighs the contribution of the people at the top while letting the people at the bottom go free. That's not the kind of socialism that leads to progress in a country.
Here's the thing, and let me ask you this question. I'd be interested to see your response to it. Why is it okay for Norway to completely shut down their borders and not let anybody in there unless they're willing to pay their fair share of taxes, be a contributing member of society? But for us here in the United States, we're bigots, racists, whatever you want to call us, because we want to shut down our border and we want to ensure that anybody who comes to this country does so through a legal port of entry. They do so by standing in line like all of those who entered this country before them in a legal way, who are contributing members of this society. They're not criminals. They're not bad people. They're not doing bad things. They're paying their taxes. They're getting up in the morning. They're going to work, and they're contributing to the overall well-being of this society. Why is it okay for Norway to shut their border down and say, hell no, you're not coming in here unless you play by our rules? But here in the United States, we got to tear down that wall, Mr. Joseph R. Biden.
I can tell you why. I have an answer to that question. It's not why is it okay, it's why is it happening, all right? So when you look at the two different systems of government, what we have in our country is the federal government has taken power away from the states. And that means that we are more disconnected from the decision makers in our government. I am much closer from an ability to vote standpoint to Gretchen Whitmer. All right. and to my state legislators. The only thing is they have no power because everything that they do is now controlled by federal dollars. Department of Education, FEMA, ICE, all of the protections are taken away from these state legislators. So when you have disconnected the ability to vote from the system of government that we have here with our states, and you've given it to the federal government, which we are much more disconnected from, and we have less ability to impact, right? My vote for a Republican candidate won't count in Michigan for a while, right? I mean, we'll see what happens. Maybe Michigan will go red this time, but we'll see. But this is exactly why. Here's the other issue. Norway is a small country with a smaller population, and that population is much closer to the traditional European population, where there are customs and traditions and not necessarily just religion, but there are foundations of a typical society and a well-functioning family environment inside of that country. And they've done a lot to keep that together, right? They encourage open spaces and people to be able to go on vacations and take care of their children. They haven't nannied the population so much that the family has eroded, right? So now in a country like Norway, everybody understands a few things. We have to take care of our own, right? Everybody in Norway has paid the price to be here and is continuing to contribute, right? And I trust that my government will ensure that that remains to be the case. We don't have those promises, which means the trust between the people and the government has eroded. And now I don't have any faith that the tax dollars that I'm giving are actually going to something that I have the ability to vote because of the erosion of rule of law, which is what we've talked about here. Just want to touch on one thing briefly, Sean.
And before you do that, I have one last question for you before you touch on that, and before we wrap. If Trump becomes president, do we buy Greenland?
Greenland?
Yeah. Wasn't that on the books during the first administration?
Oh, that would be fun. How much is it going for?
I don't know. A couple of $1 billion, maybe.
That would be great. The Greenland purchase. That would be fantastic. I think we could start like a prison colony there or something. It'd be like Australia, you know?
I don't know. Maybe if you make that a territory of the United States, it wouldn't be such a bad. Look, we'd screw that up just like we've screwed up every other place in this country. So anyways, let's get into your last point.
I would go and hang out in Greenland for a little while. That sounds like a lot of fun. So I think that one way that we can all capture this immigrant issue up in is how much are we spending? Who are we spending it on? And why are we spending it, right? There's a lot of money needed for a lot of people. There's infrastructure for dams that have collapsed. There's roads that are collapsing. There's cyber infrastructure that needs to be protected. We have all of these things that we need to spend on. Mind you, we also need to spend on paying down this national debt because the interest on our national debt is the largest line item and is continuing to be a problem. But let's think about our veterans, right? I'm a veteran, Sean. You know, this hits near and dear to home. We have a lot of veterans out there, and I'm not saying that veterans get some big pass on everything, but I will tell you, I was very offended when I found out that Kamala Harris thinks that she can give everybody $25,000 for a home loan, but I went overseas and fought for my country and I get a no interest loan. That's great, but nobody's giving me any $25,000 and nobody's historically done that. That's just not appropriate, right? We need to take care of those people who've put some time into our federal government and our freedom. And that's why we traditionally pay back. So let's look at migrant spending. And this is from Fair US. All right. It's the comparison of the cost between veterans and undocumented immigrants. Total spending on undocumented immigrants, $132 billion with a B.
That's insane.
$1 billion, right? Total spending on veterans, $217 billion. So we've got more spending on veterans. Number of undocumented immigrants, 14.3 million is the estimation right now. That's from Fair US, 14.3. We have 19.5 million veterans. Very soon, Sean, because we know the rates at which people are crossing the border, very soon the spending on illegal immigrants is going to overtake the spending on our population of United States veterans. That's people who've lost their legs. That's people who've lost their families, right? Because of
those suffering with traumatic brain injuries, with PTSD.
Those people who need suicide prevention, care,
Absolutely.
homing, right? GI Bill benefits, all of these things, the things that veterans paid in with their lives and in some cases their souls.
That's right.
They need to get back. The amount of money necessary to properly resource veteran needs, the estimation in 2021 was $243 billion. So we are underfunding veterans right now, and we are adding money cyclically. This is why they breached the FEMA box. They didn't have any money left anywhere else, so they went to FEMA, which means people in Asheville are dying because of this misappropriation here. Total number of illegal aliens occupying jobs in the United States, 7 million. I've heard this claim that if we didn't have them, that we wouldn't have anybody fulfill the jobs. That remains to be seen.
I don't buy that.
I'm waiting for somebody to prove it. But the reality is there are 7 million federal felony offenses that are being committed every day by giving somebody a job that is undocumented, which shouldn't happen. Rule of law needs to be respected, right? And if you don't like the law, then change it. Congress has the authority to do that. Just change it. But that's the law right now. The estimated number of veterans right now unemployed, 1.2 million. The total number of veterans homeless or at risk, 1.5 million, Sean.
Those numbers are staggering.
If we had $132 billion to sprinkle on top of our veterans population and even our homeless and mentally ill population, how many things could we solve?
But you know what, Ron? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We do have that money, okay? Stop funding Zelensky in the war in Ukraine, okay? Stop this open border policy that we have where we have flooded this country, and you saw and you heard the numbers that we've provided to you throughout. We have people and their families, these Gold Star families, these families of veterans that are struggling, these veterans. Listen, I have a buddy of mine. I've talked about him on the show before. He's lost his way. He was a Marine just like you. He's lost his way. He's in a homeless shelter. I mean, you know, he's had nothing but issues battling drug addiction, alcohol addiction. It's a sad story, but this is one of the stories and one of the people that have fallen through the cracks. People may say, hey, you know, you make your own path in life, but you know what? Certain people, when they're raised in a bad situation, and then they try to get out of that situation, they go into the military to serve their country. They find a regimen. They find a brotherhood. And then all of a sudden that ends because they were injured at war, or, you know, they had to be discharged for whatever reason, medical reason that exists. And now they bounce around and they're unstable. They get hooked on alcohol. They get hooked on drugs. They get hooked into doing things that people who haven't had those experiences. And then I know there's others who say, well, wait a minute, Sean, you know, look at Ron Chapman, right? I mean, he's a white collar criminal defense attorney with, you know, a law degree from here, with all these other degrees. He's made a great name for himself. He's on the news networks. He's doing all these incredible things. But there's a difference in the mental makeup of each human being. And the point that I'm trying to get across is, listen, it's absolutely criminal that even one ex-military person has to spend a night on a street, has to be left without proper medical attention, without proper psychiatric care, without medications to keep them balanced, to keep them sane. It's criminal.
Well, it is. And there's a book called On Killing by Lieutenant Colonel Stan Grossman, I believe. Tremendous book. If anybody wants to understand what happens with a veteran, he goes through a lot of the biology, psychology into what happens when you have to take human lives. And here's one thing that he says. when people go through traumatic incidents like that, where they are in life is very, very important when it relates to how it impacts them. Those people who are in a leadership position, like me, I was a captain when I was in the Marine Corps. People who are in a leadership position tend to do a lot better when it comes to their impact, because they were able to make decisions for themselves while they were in the military and while they were engaged in certain situations. So the people who were next to me, there's some officers who very well may suffer, but we actually realized that if you were older and had more authority, even if you saw the same stuff, it's going to have, generally speaking, every mind is different, a little bit less impact, maybe even a lot less impact than other things. Now, think about that private first class who was walking in front of my patrol in Afghanistan, who was waving a metal detector, hoping that it might pick up an IED, and it didn't, and he loses his legs. Or maybe, even worse, potentially, that private first class who took over that metal detector right after and had to walk many more patrols without ever hitting an IED, but had to live his life as if he may not see his legs again, and think about that every night and every day, every time he went out. Stan Grossman says that that person who has no choice and they have to move forward with that, that is into the breach, D-Day, ramps about to go down type terror. But it's not for D-Day only, or D-Day +4, or D-Day +5. It's a year of that type of trauma. And listen, D-Day was a horrific event. I'm not saying that was easy at all, but what I'm saying is the low-grade stress that you experience as a result of some of these environments, even if you didn't go through anything, can be so absolutely traumatic if you extend it for a long period of time. The data shows that. So we have millions of people that we've put through this process, and we apparently care a lot more about people who violated the law to cross into our country, take care of them, while we have veterans being denied beds at VA hospitals. We've got veterans who are now put on the state in terms of their veterans crisis programs in the courts where federal dollars aren't helping them. We have people that we have cast away. We have, and we should do another episode on this, Sean, a massive veteran suicide crisis that was actually created by the VA in its response to the opiate epidemic when they switched policy and immediately cut off veterans. You saw a massive spike in suicide. These are people who put a weapon in their mouth and pulled the trigger as a result of the government abandoning them. That's tragedy, Sean. Absolute tragedy.
It's tragedy.
And I've got, over the last 4 years, 6 friends who made that decision because they weren't getting the help that they needed. Terrible.
Oh, and like you, my brother took his life in 2003. And,
Tragic.
So I think having an episode on suicide prevention, what has led to this catastrophe in this country, how do we bring awareness to it? It's something that is near and dear to my heart. Again, the number of friends that I have who are ex-military, who are struggling day in and day out with mental illness, with post-traumatic stress disorder, with the loss of hearing, with the loss of a limb, whatever it may be, or just the night terrors from, the sorties that they were sent on, or the missions that they were sent on, or the shootouts that they were engaged in, or watching their brother or sister lose their life or lose part of their body, the traumatic injuries that these individuals have suffered. And remember, not all scars are visible. Mm-hmm. And it tends to be the scars that you don't see that are the most brutal.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
For a human being. But I think we have thoroughly covered the issues and concerns with illegal immigration. And I would like to say to all of you out there, thank you so much for tuning into The Wall. Ron and I hope you enjoyed this episode. We don't just talk about breaking down barriers. I think we're blowing them to pieces. And if today's show lit a fire under you, don't just sit there. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to click and survive below. Please connect with us on social media and join the conversation on The Wall. As always, your feedback and support help build a stronger community and brings you the content that you care about. So stay tuned for our next episode. And remember, the only walls that matter are the ones you tear down. See you soon.